As you've heard us mention a time or two already, the Georgia Office of Victim Services represents 3 different state agencies in Georgia. We represent the Department of Corrections, the State Board of Pardons and Paroles, and the Department of Community Supervision. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about each agency. This little thing that's highlighted in green, because there will be a quiz afterwards, that's considered a clue, okay? So just remember those things. The Department of Corrections has 34 state prisons. We have 12 transitional centers, 21 county prisons, 4 private facilities, and we have over 48,000 offenders, which I'll add has dropped dramatically, I won't say dramatically, due to COVID. The State Board of Pardons and Paroles, and you'll see our 5 board members here in the picture. We have over 8,000 offenders on parole or who have been paroled. We also have revoked over 2,300 of those. 763 pardon applications, and we've granted 435. The asterisk on that is because those, you might apply one year, but you might not be granted until the following. So just wanted to be transparent in that. And again, our 5 board members are full-time voting members. The Department of Community Supervision has 50 field offices. They have 35 day reporting centers, over 1,300 community supervision officers who are supervising both probationers and parolees. We have a total of, or we have over 245,000 offenders under supervision, and we have 18,500 victims who have received restitution.
All right, so just to tell you a little bit about our mission is to provide post-sentencing support and information to registered crime victims, their families, and the community. And so in essence, once the offender's been convicted and sentenced, during that process, he or she's working with a local victim advocate in the district attorney's office. And so once they got them convicted and sentenced, they essentially do a handoff to us. They're either giving the victim information to be registered, or they're registering those victims with our office so that we can start taking care of them. Got it? Going back in time a little bit, as you kind of saw, prior to 2005, there was each agency, the Department of Corrections and the State Board of Pardons and Paroles, each had their own victim services. Now, what we should have saw is kind of the confusion there. You guys can probably kind of imagine some of the issues we may have had. Where you're going to the Department of Corrections to learn the custody status, but then you still have to go to the parole board to learn if he's up for consideration and what those decisions were. And so there was a couple challenges there. They each did a good job, but it wasn't the best service to our clients. And so around 2005, the leaders got together and created the Corrections and Parole Board Office of Victim Services. And in 2015, the state created the Department of Community Supervision. So essentially took the probation officers from the Department of Corrections and the parole officers from the Parole Board and created this one organization to do all community supervision. And so they needed a victim services unit also. And so we became the Georgia Office of Victim Services, basically the single point of contact for all victims for all post-conviction issues and questions. And let me say this, if you have a question while we're going, please just raise your hand and we'll be glad to answer it. And so to kind of give you an idea how we work for 3 agencies, so 3 agencies support us. Victim Services is actually only budgeted in the state for 6 employees. So it's really just 6, but each agency is so committed to our mission, they assign employees, that they pay for to work for victims. And so we have 3 actually from the parole board, the 3 of us. The Department of Community Supervision gives us 2, Department of Correction gives us 2, and then we have 2 who are actually on the VOCA grant, as a lot of you guys are pretty aware of. And so what that results in is that we have over this last fiscal year, over 32,000 registered victims with 15 staff members, covering the entire state for all of the notifications, all of the direct services, making sure all their post-conviction needs are taken care of. And what that equals is over 30,000 of correspondence. That's incoming correspondence, outgoing correspondence, that's emails, that's letters received that we have to process, log, respond back to, get to the board, get to the Department of Corrections, get to the Department of Community Supervision, and over 9,000 phone calls dealing with victims each and every day, all year round.
I'm going to talk to you about some of the, I guess you can say, the foundation of our work. So each one of these agencies, they have statutory requirements as it relates to what they need to do for registered victims in the state of Georgia. So we'll go through each one of those, but I just want to mention that although these are our statutory requirements, there's still several other things that we do that are outside of the statutes to make sure that we're taking care of those victims during their post-conviction phase as best as we can. So for the Department of Corrections, there we go. Our primary responsibility centers around the inmate's custodial status. So if we have a registered victim on the case, we'll provide them with the notification when the offender is scheduled to be released. If they're requesting to attend a funeral or go to the hospital to visit a family member, we'll notify anybody that's registered on the case about a compassionate request. For work release requests, same thing. We'll go through that, what we call our 20-day process, to give them an opportunity to provide their input about the consideration. For the transfer of custody, so if an inmate is in custody but they have an ICE hold before they're actually released to the public, we'll let the victim know, hey, they're considering releasing him to this hold. Do you have any concerns that you want to share with them before that decision is made final? So, and ultimately, as far as the rest of our requirements for corrections, if an inmate escapes, we notify the victim within 6 hours of the escape. So yes, my phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning and I catch it. And we check the case as soon as we get the call to make sure if there is a registered victim, we make the call at the appropriate time. Obviously, we want to let the victim know what's going on to keep them safe. But as soon as that recapture occurs, we'll notify them within 24 hours of the recapture. And lastly, if an inmate dies in custody, we'll notify the victim of that as well. For the parole board, our primary duties center around their decisions. So we're required to provide 20-day advance notice of any favorable consideration the board is looking at on an offender's case. So this is what we call our 20-day process. And honestly, this is probably the bulk of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. So our 20-day process comes around, and it's based on when the board makes their decision about an offender's tentative release, a tentative parole month. Once we get about 3 months ahead of that tentative parole month, we'll go into that final review process. In our clemency division, we have the case flagged so that they know that we have a registered victim on this case. So they reroute it to our victim services unit for us to review it and notify the victims accordingly. So again, although it's a 20-day process, our specialists are dedicated. I have one, Deja, she reads through these case files and she takes everything really personal, especially those child abuse cases or child sex abuse cases. So she goes above and beyond to try to find those folks. So even if we send a letter out and we haven't heard back from the victim within 15 days of us sending that letter out, we're picking the phone up. Hey, did you get our letter? Do you have any input that you want to provide? If we can't get them on the phone, we have really good working relationships with the local victim advocates at the DA's office. We'll reach out to them and say, hey, maybe, have you heard from the victim? Did they tell you anything about getting a letter from us? Because as you know, when you work with people for years, you build a rapport with them. So although we're the post-conviction advocates, they still may have that relationship with the local DA's office. And so oftentimes we have a lot of success getting in touch with the victims to make sure that they're involved. Our ultimate goal is to get their input as early as possible so that we can get to those decision makers who they can consider it and make a decision on this offender's case. Ultimately, if the board does decide to proceed with parole in the case, we'll notify the victims within 72 hours of that decision and provide them with the offender's reporting circuit as well as those special conditions on their supervision. And even post-release, further on down the line, if the offender is requesting a pardon consideration, again, if we have a registered victim on those cases, we go through that similar process to notify and solicit input from. DCS, as you can imagine, money. For us, the offender doesn't actually start paying restitution until they're released and begin serving the community supervision portion of their sentence. So oftentimes we'll get calls from victims complaining about the offender isn't paying, they're not paying enough, or the payments are just inconsistent. So we work hand in hand with those chiefs in those circuits to, one, make them aware of the issue, two, ask that they address the issue, and three, follow up with the victim to let them know what action was taken to address the concerns. And then also with the Department of Community Supervision, if an offender requests a probation termination, same thing, we have a 20-day process for that. If we have a registered victim, to get that input to let DCS know, any concerns a victim may have about that sentence being terminated. We also have the pleasure of managing or navigating 3 different case management systems. And I know I've probably had some conversation with some folks throughout the days about our process of working with these 3 different case management systems. But there is a data exchange that occurs between them, so they do talk to each other. And we're going to kind of go through each one and what our function or what our use of those systems are. So for us, I consider Scribe to kind of be home base, because that's where we're going to actually register the victims. We keep all of our confidential contact notes in Scribe. And speaking of confidential, any victim interaction or any registered victim, that information is held in strict confidence. So even if a Department of Corrections employee logs in the Scribe, only certain people who have access to be able to see victim information can actually see whether a victim is registered on the case. Scribe is what we notify victims of, so we'll generate our notification letters in there. We also are able to provide the information concerning the offender's status to crime victims using Scribe. So where the offender is located, when they're expected to be released from prison if they're not going to be paroled out, so their maximum release date, how much performance incentive credit they have. And performance incentive credit is a program that basically allows the offender to earn points. 1 point is equivalent to a 1-month advancement on their tentative parole run. They can earn up to 12 of those points, so they can advance that TPM that the board sets by up to a year while earning these points. They earn them while in the Department of Corrections custody, but it's up to the board to actually grant those performance incentive credits and to release them on that. All right, so going into our second case management system, this one is GPAS, the Georgia Parole Evidence-Based Data System. So this is where we get all of our parole information. So as far as parole eligibility, when the offender's tentative parole month is, all of this information can be located in our GPAD system. This is actually also where the board does their voting. Because again, the board doesn't actually meet to vote on parole cases. They make those decisions independently and individually electronically. So all that's done through this GPAD system. We also, like I told you before, when we register the victim in Scribe, we're going into GPADs to actually flag the case to let our clemency division know that when you go through your final review process, before you send them out the door, send them our way so we can make sure that the victim knows what's going on and get their input on the case. GPADs also is where we get the information about the parole decision, or as far as the where the offender's going to be paroled out to, the community supervision circuit that they're going to report to once they're released, and any special conditions that are going to be on their parole, and as well as all this stuff going on post or pre-release. We also assist or keep up with our pardons and our commutations using our GPAD system as well. For the Department of Community Supervision, we call this system Portal. And Portal, again, these systems talk to each other. So this is actually where our staff is going to go and upload documents, but when they upload them in Portal, it actually becomes available in GPADs at the same time. And so Portal is also going to provide us with the offender's community supervision status. So we have access to the community supervision officer's notes. So if we make a complaint about restitution or unwanted contact, we can actually go in here and track it to see if they took any action on it yet. And we have, certain processes or policies within our office that we'll follow back up with them if we haven't seen any action take place on this case, just to make sure that it's being addressed. Oh, and then the restitution, I mentioned that as well. This is where, so I mentioned that Scribe holds all the information about restitution, but once the offender has paid, we are able to see when an actual check is cut, so we can keep the victim informed about when they should expect to receive funds. And lastly, as I mentioned, we have really good working relationships with the local victim advocates throughout the state. And so we have what we call our 3-month process. And with the 3-month process, our goal is to increase victim registration, because it's all about engaging the victim in our process as early as possible to get as much information as we can to help the board make the most informed decisions on these cases. And so with the 3-month process, the Department of Corrections will generate a report for us on any offender that's been in custody for 3 months, but they don't have a registered victim associated with their case. We receive this list from the Department of Corrections, filter it out according to the judicial circuits. We have 50, green. We have 50 judicial circuits, and then we'll send it over to the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, which is kind of the clearinghouse for prosecuting officers throughout the state. The Prosecuting Attorney's Office then sends it out to all of their DAs throughout the state. And then the victim advocates at that point, if they have any victim information on the case, which they should, because this is pretty recent, they'll send it to us, or they'll give the information to the victim and let them know that they can get registered for notifications during this post-conviction process.
I won't talk too much about the VOD program. You guys know about the VOD program, but just ours started in 2012. Of course, it's victim-initiated, victim-centered. You know, we do a 40-hour facilitator training like most of you guys do, but we also do a workshop, a 2-day workshop, where the 40 hours is teaching everybody the why. Our 2-day workshop is teaching them the how. You know, this is why we do VOD, this is why it's important, but this is how we do it here in Georgia. You know, these are the documents you need, this is how you contact the prison. You know, they take place in the private, secure location inside of a GDC facility, and of course they meet face-to-face. And probably like most of you guys, they must admit responsibility to crime, and they have to acknowledge that they won't earn any early release. So probably in 2020, like everyone else, our program kind of stopped. And really right before that, in 2019, we had to slow it down because of budget issues. And most of our facilitators are DCS officers. So we started using those officers around 2015 because they had access to cars, they had mobility, they understood offenders, they've worked with victims before. So those agencies, because of budget issues, they had to pull those officers back. They had to go back and do their regular job because they were losing officers. And then COVID hit. And so our program has been on pause really for 2 years up until this year. Now, what I will say is in 2020, our last VOD was a virtual one. It was the first time we did kind of a hybrid virtual VOD where Chris worked with the victim and did all the preparation in person, you know, victim and offender, but we ended up doing the actual final dialogue, actually completely virtual, and it was a 100% success.
Absolutely.
So we now kind of have a model for the future. You know, what we can do to, whenever this happens again, you know, we still want to put people in person, but if we need to, we can do virtual. And actually, we now kind of offer that as an option for those who don't feel so comfortable getting face-to-face with people. Go ahead. I'm trying to, what is that?
We got about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know, that's I'm speeding through. Yeah, and you see the green there.
2012.
We've completed 55 since we started. Our Victim Support Partners Program, in essence, we started noticing when we were going around town that every time we had an event, there were the same survivors there. Every event, there were the same people, you know, and what we realized is they wanted to do something more than just be a victim, just be a survivor. They wanted to help other people. So we got a core group together who created this organization to help other survivors overcome. And so they're really our ambassadors. So, you know, sometimes we can't be at events, but they are. You know, when we have VODs and the family member doesn't, the victim doesn't have a support partner, they're the support partner. When we're at events and someone needs help registering or filling out documents, they're there because they understand how challenging it can be just to put your name on a piece of paper when you're talking about a crime. And so it's been a real awesome program. Of course, COVID, you know, really limited what we did the last 2 years. So it's one of those programs that we're really restarting back up this year. I'm just moving a little faster. And finally, what was our premier program, Victim Visitors Day. You may have heard of it before. You know, as Chris said, most input to the board is coming through emails, letters. They're reading that information, and victims didn't have an opportunity to really speak to people in person until we started this program back in 2006, where victims and survivors, people in the community had a time to have a meeting with a board member or a leader from one of the organizations that we support. You got to talk to the people who make the decisions right then and there. Sometimes input was made on those cases right then and there. It's really awesome. So you're so used to writing letters, but hey, I get to talk to a board member. But there were a couple negative things from it. You know, not negative, but challenges. It was really big. You start off small, it became really big, and we essentially pulled the entire parole board to different places all across the state, which was great, but they aren't doing some of the other work. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an example of a challenge, or, you know, maybe the biggest challenge when victims talk to a parole board member?
No, the challenge wasn't talk to the parole board member. The challenge was it took a lot of work.
To get that down.
It was a lot of work. It took a lot of resources, and
it took away from the quality of the meeting with the victim, because we had so many people that had to meet with the board member that day. We were rolling them in and rolling them out. It was quicker and it was less, I guess, intimate, so to speak.
Exactly, and so, you know, it became sometimes a little bit more about pomp and circumstance instead of focusing on the reason we were there, which is the victims. Which is why we started something called Victim Impact Sessions. You know, it's a much smaller, more intimate setting. So the key points of it really quickly is that victims, we give information to the district attorney's office of life sentence cases that are coming up for consideration within the next year. Those DAs are choosing the cases that they think the board really needs to hear from. Like, these are the people they need to hear from right now. I take mess. These are the people they really need to hear from right now. And they're choosing, we choose the top 5. These are the top 5 cases the board needs to hear from. We get those cases, we call those victims, we make an appointment, and now those victims get an hour-long time to meet with those board members, with a board member for one day. So you have where in the Victim Visitors Day, you may get 5 minutes to maybe 10, because there's so many people, hundreds of people to see. Now you get an hour just to sit down and tell the board whatever it is you want to tell them. If they want to fuss, they fuss. If they want to just tell them how this crime has impacted them, they do that. It's their time to talk to them. It's more intimate, it's more time. District attorneys are involved. So far this year, we've had 3 successful sessions. We have 3 more scheduled before the end of the year.